Speaking of, because you mentioned, some of your new friends that you've made, on the right, you spoke recently, you sort of devoted a whole segment of your show to the problem of audience capture and how a lot of content creators, including and perhaps even especially independent content creators like us who have this direct line and this audience, who we can sometimes be afraid to cross. Like sometimes you take a position, you're like, oh man, I'm gonna lose a lot of subscribers over this, a lot of patrons over this. And you talked about the sort of problem that creates. Do you want to talk a little bit about just how you kind of navigated that? Because I could tell, obviously, not only from that segment that you did, but from the audience, because I watch your show and I follow the chat. A lot of them feel differently than you on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this before. The first time that I ever had to do this, I started writing about politics in 2005. And I did it because I was opposed to a lot of the civil liberties abuses and a lot of the military actions undertaken in the name of the war on terror, George Bush and Dick Cheney and the neocons and all of that. And as a result, I attracted, as you pointed out earlier, largely a left-wing, left liberal audience who thought I was, they were cheering when I was attacking George Bush. I lost a lot of them when I then started saying, you know what, when Barack Obama does these same things as he's doing, it's not any better.
Right.
The kind of hardcore Democrats left me. But that was never really my main audience. And so that wasn't really a problem. The first time it really happened was in 2010 when the Supreme Court issued the Citizens United ruling that invalidated a bunch of regulations to govern campaign finance spending. And this ruling, 5-4 ruling, the majority ruling, was universally hated by everyone who, from kind of the Joe Manchin, like Chuck Schumer wing of the Democratic Party, the more centrist conservative, all the way to the left and everybody in between. There was nobody cheering that Citizens United ruling. My view of it, though, was that they decided that case correctly. The ACLU actually had filed a brief in defense of that position on free speech grounds as well, because the case was this case where this group wanted to spend money to produce a film critical of Hillary Clinton before the election, and we're told they couldn't. It's such an obvious restriction on free speech, like pure. And even though I thought money in politics is a problem, you can't solve it by free speech abridgment. And a couple of days went by and I started getting all these emails. Hey, are you going to weigh in on the Supreme Court decision? I was a constitutional lawyer. I wrote about these things a lot. I couldn't evade it. And I knew that the vast majority of my audience was going to hate my view on it. And I had
so
to
you
write
thought
it.
that, so you had these thoughts and then they started asking you to talk about that. So you hadn't spoken about it
and I knew
yet.
I couldn't avoid it. It was just,
Right.
I didn't have quite the same level of stature and security back then that I had now. It was a big deal to alienate a huge portion of my audience. And I did. I mean, I used to go to my comment section. That was a big part of how I built my audience, was by interacting with my readers. And it was 95% of people just viciously attacking me. I lost all respect for you. I'll never be able to read you again. And it wasn't easy. Your currency is people reading your work. And if you're going to lose, even back then when I was working at Salon, still the people will hire you if you have a big audience. And if you don't, they won't.
Right.
And obviously I've been around for long enough to understand my audience. Of course, a non-trivial part of my audience are now MAGA supporters or right-wing populists, not nearly as big as people think, but still a substantial chunk who liked my views on Russiagate and my opposition to the war in Ukraine, and especially my opposition to censorship and big tech censorship and all of that. And just my general view that Trump isn't some unique Hitler figure, but just a very kind of more result of our political pathologies as opposed to the author of them. And obviously I knew at the start of this war, A, I was going to have to weigh in, and B, I've been a long-time Israel critic. And of course I did not support this Israel bombing of Gaza. And I knew this was going to infuriate a lot of my audience who never knew that about me before. Because like I said, Israel-Palestine really hasn't been discussed. I mean, I've mentioned it, but people's emotions weren't high. So people didn't really notice that I was saying these things. And the minute you start, honestly, I would rather lose 90% of my audience and 90% of my subscribers than come home and put my head on my pillow at night and know that I avoided saying something I really believe, or worse, disguised or lied about my views to placate or please my audience. Once you start doing that, just stop doing the work. You've become a slave to your audience. You're not doing anything interesting or independent or worthwhile at all. You're just feeding people what they want to hear. But it's not easy. Independent journalism does require by its nature. You don't have a large corporation paying you. You need subscribers, you need advertisers, which only come with larger audiences. We lost, I think, 15 to 20% of our podcast audience, around 10% of our paid subscribers canceled. Those are not small numbers.
No,
but
you need
really
loyalty amongst your audience too, because you don't reach as big an audience as, you know, Fox News or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. Your goal is, you know, the fact that you have a loyal, intense following, and that's how you make your impact. And when you break that, it's hard to get back. But honestly, the thing that I really do believe is that even though you will lose people the minute you start telling them things they don't want to hear on an issue they really care about, in the long run, people respect that more. And the audience that you're going to end up building over time is one that's going to know that they don't come expecting to always hear what they want to hear, but they come expecting that you're going to give your most honest assessment and respect your audience, to give those arguments, to treat those disagreements with respect. We put a lot of Israel supporters on the air. I've, you know, addressed their arguments as much as I can in the most respectful way I can. But at the end of the day, that's the audience you want. You don't want to be a slave to your audience. You want to have an audience that wants to be challenged. That's a much higher quality audience.
Yeah, and to me, as an audience member, I like shows where I don't know exactly what the host is going to say until they say it. That's why I like your show, Jimmy Dore's show. You know, we have cultivated a viewpoint diverse audience here that we are quite proud of. To me, as an audience member, that just makes the show more interesting, you know. But I do have one,
and it makes your work more interesting.
Of course,
because you're speaking to a wide variety of people, which means that you do have the ability to, you know, if some person who's on the left, who's a left-wing pundit, who has only spoken to people on the left, who no one on the right knows, who no one on the right cares about, who no one is sitting there every day bashing Israel, it's making no impact whatsoever. But if you've made inroads with conservatives, Republicans, conservative media, and you're going to be heard on this, and they may not all agree with you, but it's going to make much more of an impact, and you want that in your audience. You don't want to just cultivate an audience filled with like-minded people.
Please clap.